The Napoleonic Wars, which started with the French Progressive Wars, advanced into a complex arrangement of clashes including major European powers. The War of the Fourth Consolidation 1806 to 1807 saw an amalgamation of Britain, Prussia, Russia and other states contradicting Napoleonic France. Taking after the definitive French triumphs at the fights of Jena and Worsted in October 1806, the Prussian armed force was successfully neutralized and Napoleon turned his consideration to Russia. The campaign in Eastern Europe was checked by strongly maneuvering and fights. Napoleon's procedure was to lock in and unequivocally overcome the Russian armed force to compel Tsar Alexander I to arrange peace. By the summer of 1807, the French strengths were closing in on the remainders of the Russian armed force, coming full circle in the fight of Friedland. By mid-1807, Napoleon had effectively pushed the Russian armed force into a cautious pose. The French had accomplished an arrangement of triumphs that constrained the Russian armed force to drop back, coming full circle in an arrangement of engagements, and engagements driving up to Friedland. The Russians, beneath Common Levin Admiral von Bennigsen, had regrouped and were endeavoring to build up a protective line along the Ala stream, which streams close Friedland. Napoleon Bonaparte's armed force for the fight of Friedland was a well-organized and imposing drive. The French strengths numbered roughly 80,000 troops, counting infantry, cavalry, and big guns. Napoleon commanded an exceedingly experienced and battle-hardened armed force known for its effectiveness and adequacy in combat. The French infantry was isolated into a few corps, each with its unmistakable part. The corps were prepared with black powder rifles, pikes, and gunnery support. The French cavalry given pivotal portability and stun activity, counting overwhelming cavalry units such as the cuirassiers and light cavalry units like the hussars. French big guns was a major resource, with a tall number of cannons and howitzers that might convey obliterating capability on the battlefield. The Russian armed force, commanded by Common Bennigsen, was composed of around 65,000 troops. The Russians confronted calculated challenges and were to some degree demoralized after their later defeats. Russian infantry units were less adaptable compared to the French, but they were competent of shaping solid protective positions. The Russian cavalry included both overwhelming and light units, in spite of the fact that they were not as compelling as their French counterparts. Russian big guns was less various and less present-day than the French, affecting their adequacy in coordinate engagements. The fight of Friedland started on June 14, 1807. The French armed force progressed on Friedland, pointing to constrain a definitive showdown with the Russian powers. Napoleon's methodology included an arrangement of facilitated assaults outlined to outmaneuver and encompass the Russian positions. The French at first locked in the Russian stations and skirmishers, examining their guards and looking for shortcomings. Napoleon's sending pointed to extend the Russian lines and abuse any gaps. The French propelled an arrangement of ambushes along the Russian positions, with seriously battling ejecting around the town of Friedland. The fight was stamped by overwhelming clashes as the French looked to break through the Russian defenses. Napoleon's strategies included utilizing his ordnance to relax up the Russian positions, sometime recently propelling infantry attacks. The French cavalry played a critical part in these assaults, locks in Russian cavalry, and giving vital back to the infantry. As the fight advanced, the French overseen to encompass the Russian positions. Napoleon's technique of utilizing an arrangement of facilitated assaults to outmaneuver the foe demonstrated viable. In spite of furious resistance from the Russian troops, the French slowly picked up the upper hand. The French ordnance dispensed overwhelming casualties on the Russian positions, debilitating their resistances and making openings for infantry assaults. The Russians endeavored a few counterattacks to recapture misplaced ground, but these were for the most part repulsed by the prevalent French forces. Napoleon's maneuvers driven to the encompassing of the Russian armed force, cutting off their withdrawal courses and driving them into a helpless position. The fight of Friedland was a conclusive triumph for Napoleon. The Russian strengths endured noteworthy misfortunes, with gauges proposing around 20,000 casualties compared to French misfortunes of around 10,000. The fight stamped the conclusion of major threats between France and Russia. The vanquish at Friedland compelled Tsar Alexander I to look for peace negotiation with Napoleon. The ensuing arrangement of Tilsit, marked on July 7, 1807, stamped a noteworthy political accomplishment for Napoleon. The arrangement driven to the taking after outcomes. The settlement finished the war between the two countries and set up a brief alliance. The settlement driven to critical regional changes in Europe, with France picking up control over huge parts of Eastern Europe and impacting the reorganization of German states. The settlement too laid the basis for the mainland framework and financial bar pointed at debilitating Britain by disallowing exchange with the British Isles. The triumph at Friedland fortified Napoleon's dominance in Europe. The arrangement of Tilsit cemented his control over much of the land mass and set up a period of relative peace that permitted him to center on other regions of his empire. The union shaped between France and Russia after Friedland was moderately short-lived. In spite of the settlement, pressures between the two powers endured in the long run, driving to the breakdown of the Union and the flare-up of the French intrusion of Russia in 1812. The results of the fight of Friedland and the settlement of Tilsit had noteworthy suggestions for European geopolitics. The reshuffling of regions and the foundation of unused political courses of action impacted the adjust of control in Europe for a long time to come. The fight of Friedland was a basic engagement in the Napoleonic Wars, displaying Napoleon's military ability and key intuition. The triumph not as it were checked the summit of a fruitful campaign against Russia, but to set the organize for a period of French authority in Europe. The consequent settlement of Tilsit was a confirmation to Napoleon's impact and checked a critical minute in the history of European discretion and fighting.